Ethan had always believed the farm was a place of safety, a world away from the chaos of the city. But when the sun dipped below the horizon, the field stretched endlessly, swallowing the farmhouse in a suffocating silence. On those nights, he swore the land itself was holding its breath. The livestock grew restless, shifting uneasily in their stalls, as if they sensed something Ethan could not see. Then it began. First a single missing goat, then a cow gone without a trace. No tracks, no broken fences, just empty stalls and doors left ajar that Ethan swore he had locked tight. Each disappearance pulled him deeper into a gnawing dread. And as he stood on his porch with an old lantern in hand, staring out into the cornfields, he felt it. Something watching, something patient, something that only came when the world was darkest. Ethan had never been afraid of the dark. Growing up on his father's farm, nights were just part of the rhythm of life. Quiet, still, and filled with the distant sounds of crickets or the occasional owl calling from the woods. After his father passed away, Ethan stayed, determined to keep the land alive even if it meant living alone, miles from the nearest neighbor. To him, the farm wasn't just soil and wood. It was memory, legacy, and survival. But recently the nights felt heavier, as though something unseen pressed down on the air itself. It started small, a chicken missing here, a goat that wandered off and never returned. At first he blamed coyotes, maybe a stray wolf. But when he checked the ground, he found nothing. No paw prints, no feathers, no blood, just empty space where life had once been. The unease gnawed at him. Ethan had grown up hearing the old stories, tales of things that walk at night, passed down by farmers who swore they'd seen shapes moving through the cornfields under moonlight. He used to laugh at them, dismissing it as superstition or the result of too much whiskey on cold nights. But now he wasn't laughing. On one particular evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, Ethan noticed how restless the animals had become. The cows shifted nervously in their stalls, snorting, their ears twitching toward the woods. Even the dog, usually bold, refused to leave the porch, growling at the shadows stretching across the fields. Ethan tried to calm them, but their fear was contagious. He stood on the porch, lantern in hand, staring out into the endless rows of corn. The breeze was soft, almost too soft, and the silence stretched unnaturally. It wasn't the silence of peace, it was the silence of waiting. His stomach knotted as he realized he couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was out there, watching him from just beyond the line of sight. For the first time in his life, Ethan didn't feel like the master of his farm. He felt like prey. The farm had always been quiet at night, but lately that quiet felt unnatural, almost staged, like the world was holding its breath. Ethan found himself waking at odd hours, sitting up in bed, heart pounding, unsure of what had stirred him. The creaks of the old farmhouse seemed louder than usual, the windows rattling in their frames, though no wind blew. One night, he was pulled from sleep by a sound that sent ice through his veins, the thunder of hooves. For a split second, he thought the herd had broken loose, stampeding across the pasture. He leapt from bed, grabbed his lantern, and rushed outside barefoot into the cold dirt. But when the light from his lantern cut through the darkness, his blood ran cold. The pasture was empty. Every cow, every goat, every sheep gone. The barn doors hung wide open, swaying gently as if someone had pushed them just moments before. Ethan froze, his mind racing. He was certain, absolutely certain, that he had bolted them shut himself before going to bed. He sprinted toward the barn, calling out for his animals, but his voice felt swallowed by the night. Inside, the stall stood empty. No broken wood, no paw prints in the soil, not even a smear of blood, just silence. Silence so thick it seemed to press against his ears. Kneeling in the dirt, Ethan tried to make sense of it. How could an entire herd vanish without a single trace? No predator he knew could do that. Coyotes would leave blood. Wolves would scatter the herd. Thieves would leave tire tracks on the dirt road. This was something else. Something that didn't make sense, and then he heard it. A whisper, soft, almost like breath drifting through the barn. At first he thought it was the wind. But the air was still. The words weren't clear, but the tone was. Low, drawn out, almost like someone calling from far away. His lantern flickered. He spun toward the sound, and for the briefest moment at the edge of the cornfield he saw it. A tall, impossibly thin figure, darker than the night itself. Its shape bent unnaturally, head cocked at a strange angle. Ethan blinked, and it was gone. The silence returned. But now the quiet no longer felt empty. It felt crowded. By the third night, Ethan's fear had curdled into something else. Resolve. He couldn't keep standing by while his animals vanished. This land was all he had left of his father, and he would not lose it to shadows. He prepared like a soldier readying for war. Lanterns were placed around the barn and pasture, their orange glow flickering against the darkness. He dug out his father's old hunting rifle, polishing the barrel with hands that trembled just slightly. And as an extra precaution, he set his tape recorder on a wooden crate in the barn, its reels clicking softly as they spun. If he couldn't stop it, at least he might capture proof. The animals, what few remained, were restless. They stamped their hooves, eyes wide and glossy, staring toward the fields as if something was already moving out there. Even the air felt heavier, thicker as the night deepened. It started just after midnight. A low, guttural growl rolled in from the tree line, not the yipping of coyotes or the howl of a wolf, but something deeper, something that didn't belong to any animal Ethan knew. The lanterns outside began to flicker one by one, as if a presence moved past them, dimming their light with every step. Ethan gripped the rifle, knuckles white, forcing himself to breathe slow and steady. Then he saw it. At the far edge of the cornfield, standing motionless between the rows, was a shape. It was tall, too tall, its shoulders hunched unnaturally, its head bent at a sharp, unnatural angle. Even from the distance, Ethan felt its eyes, though he couldn't see them, boring into him. The cows shrieked, a sound so piercing it barely resembled animal cries. He spun toward them, lantern swinging wildly, only to find the stalls empty. They were gone. Again. The doors hadn't moved, the locks still fastened. But the animals had vanished as though swallowed by the night. Ethan turned back toward the cornfield. The figure hadn't moved, but now faintly, glowing shapes shimmered just behind it, as if dozens of unseen eyes blinked open all at once. His chest tightened, sweat rolling down his back. The tape recorder clicked loudly in the silence, reels spinning, capturing only static. Ethan realized then, whatever was out there wasn't just taking his livestock. It was toying with him, watching him, waiting. For the first time, he wondered if it wanted him too. Ethan hadn't slept in days. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands rough and trembling, but his resolve was harder than iron. Whatever haunted his farm had taken nearly everything, but it wouldn't take the rest. Not without a fight. That night, he sat in the barn, lantern glowing faintly at his side, his father's rifle across his lap. Every creak of the wooden beams echoed like a gunshot. Every gust of wind felt like a warning. He whispered to himself, steadying his breath. This is my land. My father's land. Nothing drives me out. Hours dragged by. Midnight came and went. The silence grew unbearable, so heavy it pressed on his chest. Then it began. A scream split the night, high-pitched and guttural like no sound he'd ever heard. Part animal, part human, all wrong. The lantern's flame sputtered. The barn doors rattled as if shoved by invisible hands. The animals, what little remained, stomped and cried in terror. And then it appeared. The figure slipped through the shadows like smoke. Inside the barn, its form was clearer now. It was man-like but distorted. Its limbs were too long, its back hunched, its face hidden in a blur of darkness except for two faintly glowing eyes that seemed to pierce through Ethan's soul. It didn't walk so much as glide, as though the floor itself carried it closer. Ethan raised the rifle, his hands shaking, finger resting on the trigger. But a voice inside him, maybe his father's memory, maybe instinct, held him back. Violence wouldn't stop this thing. Not something that had no flesh to wound, no blood to spill. The creature hissed, the air growing colder, its body twitching unnaturally as it crept closer. Ethan's fear was suffocating, his heartbeat pounding so loud it hurt his ears. But somewhere inside that storm of terror, a flicker of courage lit. He stood, lantern lifted high, voice trembling but firm. You don't own me. You don't own this land. Whatever you are, leave. The words rang through the barn stronger than he expected. The creature recoiled, its eyes flaring bright with rage. It screeched, shadows snapping violently against the walls. For a moment, Ethan thought it would tear him apart. But then, with a guttural roar, it retreated. The lantern flared, blasting the barn with light. And in an instant, the figure was gone, vanished into the night. The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan stood trembling, but he was still standing. And for the first time in nights, he felt the air was his again. The farm was quiet again. Too quiet. Days passed, then weeks, and still the eerie visits stopped. The animals that had survived remained nervous, often huddling together in the farthest corners of the pasture, but no more disappeared. The barn, doors stayed shut, the fences stayed whole, and no whispers slithered through the corn at night. But peace didn't feel like peace anymore. It felt fragile, as though it balanced on the edge of something waiting to return. Ethan knew better than to believe the nightmare was over. You don't face a thing like that and expect it to vanish forever. He carried on with his chores, repairing the broken fence lines, stacking hay in the loft, mending the roof where winter storms had beaten it thin. To anyone else, he might have seemed like a man going about ordinary farm life. But Ethan was different now. The silence no longer comforted him. It reminded him of that night when the shadow seemed alive, when his very breath felt stolen. At dusk, he often caught himself staring at the horizon, lantern in hand, waiting for a flicker of movement in the corn. Sometimes he swore he saw it, just a shift in the stalks when there was no wind, or a shape too tall to be a man lingering at the tree line. When he blinked, it was gone. But deep down, he knew it was still there, watching. The neighbors whispered about how he'd scared off the devil, and though Ethan said nothing, part of him wished it were true. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a man who had been tested and barely survived. Yet in that survival was something undeniable. He had stood his ground. He had not let fear own him. One cold evening, sitting on the porch with the lantern by his side, he thought of his father. He could almost hear his voice in the breeze. Fear only wins when you let it. Stand tall, son, even against the darkness. Ethan smiled faintly, though his eyes lingered on the restless cornfields. He knew the thing would never truly be gone. But he also knew that when it came again he would be ready, and sometimes travelers passing down the lonely dirt road swore they heard whispers in the night, carried on the wind from Ethan's farm. A warning, or perhaps a reminder, that courage can burn even in the darkest places.